Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director at Word on Fire. Joining me today is not just Bishop Robert Barron, but also an illustrious guest, John Allen Jr. John Allen is CNN's senior Vatican analyst. He's the editor of Crux, which is an independent Catholic media outlet operated in partnership with the Knights of Columbus. John is the author of many, many books on the Vatican and church affairs, and George Weigel has called him the best Anglophone Vatican reporter ever. So it's a great honor to have John Allen with us. So first of all, Bishop Barron, welcome. Good to be here with you.
Brandon, thank you. Always a joy to be on with you.
And John, welcome. What a delight it is to have you with us here.
It's great to be here.
Well, listen, the reason we're bringing both of you together is because you just collaborated on a new book. The book is titled To Light a Fire on the Earth, Proclaiming the Gospel in a Secular Age. It's a new hardcover book being released by Image Books on October 31st, so it's right around the corner here. Actually, I just realized this today, Bishop, that this book will debut on the exact 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation.
You're right. Yeah.
That wasn't intentional, but
No,
it's pretty poignant. The book is a book-length conversation between the two of you, and it ranges over all sorts of topics, from God to atheism to beauty to social media to much, much more. And so we thought we'd devote this episode of the Word on Fire show to discussing the book between the two of you. So first of all, let me turn to you, John. What were your first impressions when Image Books proposed this idea to you?
Well, Gary Jansen, the editor at Image, who has believed in this project from the beginning, was the one to call. And he asked me, hey, would you be interested in doing a book with Bishop Robert Barron? And I flashed on one of the pivotal moments in my life in that instant, which was when many years ago I was working at the National Catholic Reporter in Kansas City, and somebody came to me and said, would you be interested in taking an assignment in Rome? And for me, that was like I'm playing for, the Toledo Mud Hens or something in the minor leagues. And somebody asks me if I'd like to be called up to play in Yankee Stadium. I mean, the obvious answer to that question is yes, and when can I get there? And I had the same reaction in this set of circumstances. I mean, at that moment, I think, Bishop, I had maybe met you once or twice, maybe on a TV set someplace. But I didn't really know you all that well, but I certainly knew a great deal about you. I mean, I had followed your career. I had followed the Catholicism series. I had listened to some of your talks online. I was a great admirer. And the opportunity to get to know you a little bit and try to figure out what made you into the great evangelist that you are today was just incredibly enticing. So, my response was, sign me up, okay? And please don't make any more phone calls. I'm in.
How about you, Bishop? What were your first impressions when the idea was proposed to you?
Well, honestly, we're going to sound like each other's publicity agents here, but when Gary proposed it to me, my reaction was like, oh, wow, can we ever get John Allen to do this? I mean, with his, stature and his busyness around the world, and would John ever think of doing an interview with me? That's honestly what I thought. So I was delighted when you were willing to do it. So we kind of sound like a mutual admiration society here, but that's honestly how I felt, was like, gosh, if we could ever get John Allen, that would be tremendous.
Now, John, in the book, you spend the introduction offering a sort of biographical account of Bishop Barron, particularly his early years, his formation as a priest. And you begin by noting how it's been almost exactly 50 years since Archbishop Fulton Sheen delivered his last live broadcast on U.S. television. And you say in the introduction that, in your own words, Bishop Barron is, to American Catholicism in the early 21st century, what Sheen was in the mid-20th century. Can you talk about this comparison?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to resist, Bishop, the temptation to ask you, now having gone through the experience, do you still think it was so tremendous to bring me on board?
Yeah. Oh, my God.
And I'm going to answer Brandon's question.
Good.
Listen, I mean, obviously, the Sheen era, the 30s, 40s, and 50s were kind of, the 50s in particular, were a kind of golden moment for American Catholicism. And so the comparison between then and now is kind of apples and oranges. But, what I meant was, I grew up out in the high plains of western Kansas, a really rural part of the country. And my grandparents were part of a very small Catholic minority in a very vast Protestant sea out there. And I remember what watching Fulton Sheen on TV meant to them. And of course, I didn't ever participate, but I heard them tell stories, you know, and they would talk about how not only did Sheen catechize them and explain the faith to them in a way that made them understand it at a more depth level, but even more than that, he was just a huge boost to Catholic pride. You know, Fulton Sheen, when in prime time, I mean, he was up against Milton Berle. Okay, let's not forget that. Okay, and he beat him in the ratings. And for American Catholics of that generation, the fact that one of our own could go into the most secular, Protestant dominated milieu in this country and hold his own and be a source of pride, you know, just meant everything to them, you know? Now, we're in a very different historical moment. It's not, you know, but still, we are in a moment in which there are a lot of challenges to Catholic pride today. I mean, you know, the sex abuse scandals and the challenges of secularism and you know, the political divisions in the church and all those things we know about and that we read about all the time and that we're exposed to all of the time. It can be tough sometimes for a Catholic in this culture to hold his or her head up high and feel good about who they are. And I think that's the Bishop Barron magic. When you listen to Bishop Barron present the faith in the public sphere, he does it with such dignity and with such attractiveness and with such logical force that you listen to him and you say, yeah, that's what Catholicism is at its best. And so just as Fulton Sheen in his time made a kind of beleaguered Catholic population that was kind of on the cusp of breaking through into the mainstream, he made them feel good and made them proud. Today, we're already in the mainstream, but in the mainstream, we sometimes have reason to doubt our legitimacy. And I think Bishop Barron has that same magic touch.
Bishop, after the introductory biographical chapter, you guys spend the next 3 chapters talking about truth, goodness, and beauty. However, interestingly, the first chapter is on beauty. You start with beauty. Was that intentional? Why did you do that?
It was. First of all, John, thank you for that. That wonderful endorsement. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's really good that we started with beauty because I feel, especially in our time, when there's such skepticism about the true and the good, right? If you propose something as true in our culture, people say, well, who are you to tell me what's true? Isn't there just my truth and your truth? And even more, if you say, well, here's the good, here's the way you should be living your life, people really get reactive. And so I felt for a long time that of the 3 great transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful is probably the best one to start with. Now, I think they lead to the other 2. I mean, I think beauty leads to goodness and truth. But if you start with the beautiful, what's beautiful and compelling about Catholicism? It's less threatening to people. It's more winsome. It's just saying, hey, take a look at this. I'm not telling you yet how to behave or what to believe. I'm just saying, look at this, whether it's the Sistine Chapel or it's Mother Teresa's sisters or it's the Sainte Chapelle. And the hope is that it would beguile you enough to think, yeah, what made that possible? What world produced such beauty? And that can be a way in that's much more winsome for people today. So that's why we started there.
John, in these early chapters where you're sort of defending the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the Catholic faith, one metaphor pops up several times, and that's the metaphor of baseball. I know it's one that you and Bishop Barron both favor. Can you talk a little bit about how baseball helps us to understand Catholicism?
Well, I mean, first of all, one of the things I discovered in this project is that both the bishop and I are kind of baseball nerds. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor that was never going to see the light of day in the book. But I mean, I remember us once spending like 45 minutes arguing the merits of the designated hitter rule, which I actually found very illuminating. I still don't agree with you, by the way. I think the designated hitter rule is the authentically Catholic option. You're more purist, mechanical, and Calvinist about these things. But anyway. Look, here's why I loved it as a metaphor for the book, because Robert Barron, he's an evangelist for Catholicism, but there's a sense in which he's an evangelist for baseball, too. I mean, he's passionate about it. He loves it, and he loves to share it with others. And when you ask him why, what he'll say is, well, I mean, it's not that anybody is going to go to hell if they're not a baseball fan. But it's just like, this has enriched my life so much. I mean, it is so beautiful and so right. And there's such just like an inherent power to it, that what kind of friend would I be if I didn't want to share that with others? If I didn't want others to see the same truth that I do, right? And I think, therefore, it opens up where he comes from as an evangelist. I mean, I really do not believe that Robert Barron approaches the enterprise of evangelism from a negative point of view. That is that, people are going to be lost. I mean, I think he of course, does believe ultimately that Christianity is the full truth about the human condition, of course. But it's not that he believes that people are going to be lost or abandoned or disadvantaged. It's rather that he believes there is something so beautiful, so true, so compelling about Catholicism that anybody's life would be enriched by moving more deeply into it. And it's that passion that he exudes, in a lesser way for baseball and in the full sense for the church, that I just think is part of his power.
We're talking here about a new book coming out called To Light a Fire on the Earth. It's a joint venture between Bishop Robert Barron and John Allen Jr., both of whom are joining us here on the air. You can pre-order your copy of the book by visiting wordonfireshow.com/book. wordonfireshow.com/book. You'll find the lowest price anywhere. You get free shipping. You get some cool bonuses. So be sure to pre-order the book that we're discussing here on the air. Hey, Bishop, I want to turn to you and talk about one of my favorite sections of the book. It's on your personal spiritual life. You don't talk about this too often. You give a lot of talks and lectures on theology and philosophy, but your spirituality, I think, is quite beautiful. In that chapter, you begin by describing an encounter with one of your professors in France, Father Michael Corbin, before class one day, one that really shaped your prayer life. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it affected you?
Yeah. Michel Corbin was he's still alive. He's a Jesuit. He teaches at the Institut Catholique in Paris, where I was. And when I arrived there for my studies, I went to a number of seminars. And the style, certainly in France, but especially in academic circles, was to be kind of cool, kind of secular. Almost all the professors wore, coat and tie. They used the language of secular academics. So I was kind of used to that, No priest wore a collar when I was in France. Well, one day I came to Michel Corbin's seminar. I'd never met him before. When I got there early, which is the usual Barron manner, I get to things early. And I walked in, and there he was. I kind of surprised him. And I walked in, and there he was, and he was praying the rosary. And I had never seen that, actually, in France, certainly among the professorial class. And, he just kind of came to attention then, and I said hello to him. But it struck me that, here's a professor who clearly prays. When eventually I chose him as my thesis director, I'll never forget, he said to me, "La première chose, Robert," the first thing, Bob, he did call me Bob, I remember, in his French accent. "The first thing you should do," and I thought, he wants me to get a book, or he said, "The first thing you should do is get a little icon of the Lord and put it next to your computer." And it was very wise advice, and I followed it to this day. Next to where I write, now in Santa Barbara, I have a little icon of the Lord. And that really struck me as I started my doctoral work. It wasn't, go get this book by Hegel, or, you've got to get... It was get an icon so that you're always doing your work under the aegis of the Lord. So yeah, Corbin had a big impact on me precisely as an academic, but within a spiritual framework.
Now, let me follow up on that. One of the things that you've become known for as well is your threefold path to holiness that you've proposed.
Yeah.
You cover this at length in the book, but tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, it's something I've just distilled from a lot of reading of the spiritual masters. It's not really unique to me at all. It's just kind of a distillation. Find the center, know you're a sinner, and realize your life is not about you, are the three great paths. And the center is where we always begin. It's the moment of grace. It's the breakthrough that reorganizes your life. You found a new gathering place for your life. It's not pleasure, money, power, honor, worldly success. It's Christ. It's the Lord. He's the center. Now your whole life gets gathered around him. Then that leads naturally to a second step, which is, what are the things in me that are preventing me from centering my whole life on Christ. And so we talk about sins, and we talk about attachments, and we talk about addictions in our language today. How do I deal with those? That's the second path, right? Knowing you're a sinner. And then once you've dealt with your sin and Christ is the clear center of your life, mission follows. Your life is not about you. It's about spreading the word. So what John was saying earlier is right, that once the Lord has seized you, he always sends you. Balthasar says that the beautiful elects you and then sends you. See, that's true of baseball too, in an analogical way, right? Is baseball elected me as a kid. It chose me, as it were. And then it sent me. Go, tell the world about this. It's beautiful. So now at a much higher pitch, the Lord centers you, and he elects you, and then he sends you. So there's path 3, knowing your life's not about you. And I would submit, go through the Bible, story after story after story, and I bet you're going to find some version of those 3 basic spiritual moves.
John, in a way, this whole book, which is called To Light a Fire on the Earth, is an introduction to Bishop Barron's unique style of evangelization. Now, over the years, you've covered a lot of effective evangelists. You've written a similar book-length interview with Cardinal Dolan. You've written books on Cardinal Ratzinger. You've covered many founders of religious movements. What makes Bishop Barron different? What stands out to you? Why does he seem to be so uniquely effective today?
Well, first of all, let me tell you a story, and then I'll unpack the significance of the story for answering your question. When I do books, often, I'm doing interviews that stretch out over several days for the books, and I just don't have time to transcribe all that material myself. So my poor wife gets enlisted a lot of the time into doing that. And my wife, you need to understand, first of all, is not Catholic. She's Jewish. And secondly, I think she would meet most conventional stereotypes of a kind of liberal Jewish feminist. And therefore, not necessarily always positively inclined to Catholic orthodoxy. Okay. And halfway through transcribing my first round of interviews with Bishop Barron, we were in Denver at the time, at our house in Denver, and my office is up on the top floor. So she came up to the top floor and said, "I've been listening to this Barron guy, and I gotta say, I just think that guy is brilliant. I mean, I can't get enough of him. I just eat it up. It's the smartest stuff I've ever heard about the Catholic Church." I think that's the Bob Barron effect in many ways. Because here's the thing, you mentioned that I've covered a lot of effective evangelists, and that's true. But why are these people effective? Well, in some cases, it's because they are extraordinarily clear and passionate about the basic principles of the Catholic faith. In other cases, it's because they are very good at outreach to people who don't share those principles, at meeting them halfway, trying to invite them to conversation, trying to bring them in. In other cases, it's because they are just so razor smart, but still accessible, that you hang on every word they have to say because you think, whether I agree with it or not right now doesn't matter. This guy knows what he's talking about. Okay? Robert Barron is all 3 things at once. And that is a pretty unique package. That's why I got excited about this project at the beginning, and I will tell you, nothing that I experienced along the way convinced me of anything other than I didn't know the half of it.
John, the very last section in the book, the last chapter, is titled From Mission to Movement, and it looks at the growth of Bishop Barron's Word on Fire from a small local apostolate to a surging international movement. Now, I know you've extensively covered the so-called new ecclesial movements in the church. Do you see Word on Fire perhaps growing into one of those type movements? What's your take on its impact and its future?
Well, I mean, first of all, obviously its future is not up to me, but as I understand Bishop Barron's vision, that he wants this to become a permanent movement in the life of the church. He doesn't want it to end with him. I personally think all the ingredients for an extremely successful movement are there. You have the charismatic founder in the form of Bishop Barron. You have the core team of advisors and collaborators who have been with him for a long time. And of course, Brandon, you're very much part of that mix, who share his vision and who have the wherewithal to carry this forward. You have a much broader set of people out there who have encountered the bishop's writings and his talks and his videos and so forth over the years, who would be predisposed to be supportive. And I do think if you look around at the landscape of Catholic movements today, there are a lot of very phenomenally successful ecclesial movements out there. But at least in the English-speaking world and in the highly secular realm of the English-speaking world, there isn't really one that's particular métier is evangelization. So I think there is obvious space for this. Listen, man, I've told Bishop Barron this. My vision is one day before he and I are off the scene, I want to see him standing there on St. Peter's Day, on Pentecost Sunday, when the Pope every year brings all the new movements and their founders together. And I want to see Bishop Barron up there on the stage, with Jean Vanier from L'Arche and Andrea Riccardi from Sant'Egidio and Emmaus from the Focolarini, all the great founders and leaders, because I think that's where he belongs naturally. I think that's where Word on Fire belongs naturally. And so, like I say, it's not up to me, but I'm definitely rooting that happens.
What do you think about that, Bishop?
Well, pretty good. And thank you, John, for all those great, generous remarks. And, first of all, I want to say something about the interview process, because you and I talked for about, 25 or 26 hours, if you add them all up. And a lot of people asked me, what was that like? To be with John Allen for these 25 hours of interviews. And I said, well, it's kind of like a combination of psychoanalysis and your doctoral defense. I sort of felt that it was, I mean that in both senses, it really is a compliment, because you looked a lot into my own, life and motivations and, interests, and then also looking at a lot of tough, hard issues in the church. So it was actually a very stimulating experience for me to sit down and talk it through. And I do think that comes through in the book. I think the book has that, in the best sense, that conversational tone, so you didn't do it simply as a, dry question and then, sort of canned answer. It really reads the way the conversation unfolded. So I think that's a great advantage. And then to the movement, yes, I'm with you. At one point you said to me in the interview, would you be happy to be the American Giussani, Giussani who founds Comunione et Liberazione? And I said, yeah, not bad. I could certainly live with that, to be founder of a movement that has an impact on the wider culture, especially in this area of evangelization. So that's the dream, and I keep turning it over to God and to all these wonderful people that work with me. But yeah, that's my vision.
Bishop, I want to close here with a final question. The subtitle of the book that we've been discussing during this whole episode, the title is To Light a Fire on the Earth. Yeah. The subtitle is Proclaiming the Gospel in a Secular Age. So how can Catholics do this? How can they best proclaim the gospel in a secular age?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. One is to live your faith publicly and joyfully, is to give joyful witness. For too long, we've internalized the etiquette of privatization, that faith is something that you keep to yourself. Maybe you whisper it among fellow devotees, but that's not Christianity. From the beginning, look at Pentecost. It's a boldly public event. So I think to live the faith publicly and joyfully. And then secondly is get informed and get smart. Always have the grounds for giving the reason for the hope that's in you, as we hear in 1 Peter. So get smart. We've had to dumb down Catholicism for way too long. And I think there are a lot of good resources now for helping us deal with the challenges coming from the new atheists and secularists. Get informed, get smart, read. We're a smart tradition. So be public, be joyful, be smart, I think are things we can do.
Listen, I want to thank both of you guys for joining us for this great interview. John, thanks so much for joining us from Rome. We really appreciate being with you.
Again, any opportunity to bask in Bishop Barron's reflected glory, just tell me when. I'll be
Oh, yeah. Terrific. Thanks,
Good.
John.
And thank you, Bishop, for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
And listen, everyone listening to this, you want to pick up a copy of this book. It's called To Light a Fire on the Earth, and you can pre-order your copy by visiting wordonfireshow.com/book. You get a 25% discount, free shipping, 3 free bonus ebooks, so there's no reason not to order today. So be sure to visit wordonfireshow.com/book and pick up your copy. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire Show.